Hello.
Mr. Hudson, it's Jason. How are you?
Jason, you've had a busy week.
I know. I'm sorry we haven't had an opportunity to do one of our regular calls in a while, but I thought it was a good time.
We've been busy with you.
Yeah.
Just working behind the scenes, right?
Thought it would be a good time to catch up.
That's okay. Let's do that.
Now, this Washington Post article, I'm pretty concerned about it. What did you think?
Well, do you hear the banjos playing the music from Deliverance?
Yes, as you've referred to in the past.
Right, and the Washington two-step, right?
Yep.
And unfortunately, I think that some other people are pitching in with their guitars. And the Washington Post, I find it, one, I'm not surprised by their article. Two, if you think about the timing, it's rather interesting considering that their timing seems to correlate with the information we've been bringing out.
Right, related to Laurel Everly.
Absolutely. And then you consider that the common denominator with the Washington Post, I mean, same guy owns it that owns Amazon, right? Then there's $600 million that he gets from the CIA. Oh, I'm sorry. That $600 million is allocated for Amazon to build them a cloud, right?
Something like that.
Well, how many times in the past, and I think that, by the way, your show with Mr. Ortel and your guest today was excellent.
Thank you.
But I would venture to say that people of great minds like Mr. Ortel and your guest today would look at that and say, well, there's probably a good possibility that we would see the same criminal creative accounting that will take place with that $600 million as we've seen with so many times with other issues. So,
right.
and then of course the Washington Post hired one of the great writers of all time, right, Mr. Podesta.
The Podfather, of course.
Exactly. So, to be honest about it, not just those issues, but the thing of it is that the Washington Post, I think, is just a CIA propaganda machine. And this is nothing but smoke.
Right.
This is nothing but smoke. And they don't mention so many things.
Yeah.
There's nothing in here about the two material witnesses that have been discovered.
Right.
There's nothing in here about the fact that any information from Laurel when she was living in one of the rental homes of Mr. Awan. There's no mention of the strange shed that was on the carport that had a light on all the time, which was described to her as a cooling fan light, because the items inside had to be kept cool. Nothing of that. They don't mention that.
Well, how about the Cox cable account that had the router in the basement and has been active until June of 2017? That seemed very substantial to me.
I think that might be something that a lot of people have missed, because the way we understand it is that Laurel had a cable company that she used with a separate account upstairs, and then come to find out there's another account that's hooked up to the device that was found in the basement. So there's two accounts in that house.
That's right. And she knew nothing about the Cox cable account. And this locked shed, I mean, obviously this isn't proof, but it certainly seems like strong evidence of computer activity at that house that she didn't know about. And additionally, Thomas Paine, of course, was on that broadcast with us, and in a private conversation I had with him after the broadcast, he described that piece of evidence as a grand slam.
No doubt about it. And obviously it's significant, or otherwise the Washington Post, if they were truly wanting to put the truth out and not wanting to be a propaganda machine, they would have mentioned it, don't you think?
I would think so, but the other interesting factor, and I republished the initial Laurel Everly telephone call today,
Uh-huh.
The first one, I made a mistake at the end, and it had like 9 minutes of blank video and audio at the end, and I just wanted to trim it down so I could have it automatically linked to her newest interview. But in that first phone call, she talks about the fact that Shawn Boburg, one of the first things she says is that Shawn Boburg called her up, and that was 2 weeks prior to that interview, which is already a week old. So the Washington Post had this information for 3 weeks, and they didn't choose to publish it until 1 week after we started publishing about Laurel Everly and 4809 Sprayer Street and the evidence that was found there. And they made no mention of any of the evidence.
Correct. Exactly. So why is that? The question then becomes, well, is the Washington Post inept? Is Shawn Boburg inept? Is he forgetful? Or is he a propaganda player? I'd say he's a propaganda player. And he's picking and choosing the information that he wants to put out, most of which the information that's truthful is not getting published. Mm-hmm. And the information that he wants or has been told to peddle is the information that he's peddling. Mm-hmm. But very interesting. And then you take a lot of people don't give much credence to Sorcha Fowl, mm-hmm. But I thought that was a very interesting article.
You mean the Sorcha Fowl article in What Does It Mean, where he talks about Trump withholding military aid for Pakistan in order to coerce them into returning Hina Alvi?
Correct. And we've been looking into that, and we have been able to confirm really almost everything that was in that article. So this information, the investigation into the Awans and the awareness of the Awan situation dates all the way back to February and possibly earlier of 2017, going all the way back, or 2016 possibly. So in this article here, they're saying that this is something that the House of Representatives, they met behind closed doors for briefings with the Inspector General's office, investigators assigned to the Inspector General's office. Now, if we take a look at the timeline here, we're looking at September 2016, prior to the election. After the election, you have to ask yourself, during this time, President Trump is supposedly receiving intelligence briefs. Mm-hmm. Was he briefed on this last year, around this time, in September 2016?
Don't know.
Yeah, we don't. And then after he became president in November, we have no indication as to how much investigative activity took place between then and February. I think Sorcha Fowl mentions February 2nd, mm-hmm. 2017, when this seems to have ramped up behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because they say that the investigators with the Inspector General's office, who had been supposedly tracking this quietly, that they were alarmed. Right here it is, in his own writing, in Mr. Boburg's writing, he admits here that they were alarmed by what they saw. The employees appeared to be accessing congressional servers without authorization. Mm-hmm. And then he tones it down, which is an indication that they could be reading and or removing information. So then it says that for some who listen to the findings, the fact that the employees were born in Pakistan, now he says it set off alarms about national security. Mm-hmm. And they evidently got this according to two participants who spoke on the condition of anonymity. How convenient is that, right?
Yeah, well, right. That's how it always is.
So then this article continues. It says the IT workers who are, and then he makes sure that they're naturalized U.S. citizens, were bending the rules on network access, and they were sharing job duties, another violation, And then he says that these were violations of House protocol, but not espionage.
Right.
But not espionage. Well, how does he determine that? That it's a violation of protocol and not espionage if these individuals are reading information coming out of Congress when you stop to consider the various committees that these individuals sit on. But he goes on to say later that that information is held on a different set of servers. So they didn't have access to that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that at all.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it says that the matter was soon referred. Okay, so now we're going to move from the Inspector General's office, and it's turned over then to the Capitol Police.
Right.
And then it says that the investigation is then, that the Capitol Police then begin to receive assistance from the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force.
That caught my eye for sure.
Well, whose responsibility is it to investigate potential espionage in the United States?
I presume the FBI.
Correct. It's not the Inspector General. It is not the Capitol Police. It is the FBI. Why did it take so long for it to finally reach the FBI? And why does he say in his own article that it appears that the Capitol Police are the chief investigators in this, but that they're receiving assistance from the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force?
No, I mean, it's still some strange things that went on at the Capitol Police in terms of giving me the wrong phone number for the detective, and they offered Laurel an explanation for that destruction of contraband receipt, but I mean, I wasn't in there when she spoke to them.
Yeah. So then he goes on to say, well, this story, when it broke, has grabbed headlines. And he says that since the story of the House IT workers, the brothers, Imran Awan, Abid Awan, Jamal Awan, Imran's wife, Ina Alvi, and a friend, Rao Abbas, that it has become a lightning rod charged by the convergence, you got to love this. Now we've got a problem here because it's the convergence of politics. It's not that these people are ISI spies.
Yeah.
Oh, no. We're not going to say that. We're not even going to remotely say that there's a possibility that they are ISI spies. So what does he say? He says that there's a convergence of politics, cybersecurity, and fears of foreign intrusion. And so what does he do then? He says, well, this has attracted unfounded conspiracy theories and intrigue from far-right news organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's just amazing to me that that he wants to dispel the idea that there was a potential cover-up, that there was in fact an espionage ring, that Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz was part of it, that this was utilized in any way during the election.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, you know what they don't want to talk about?
What's that?
It appears what they want to steer as far away from the possibility that there was in fact hacking that took place at the DNC, but it wasn't the Russians.
Right.
It wasn't the Russians. It was Hillary Clinton, along with the people that were working with her.
Right.
Like Mr. Comey and Loretta Lynch and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and former Congressman Weiner and Huma Abedin, who has direct, and it's a known fact that she has direct, strong ties to who? The Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
But oh no, he doesn't want to talk about that. The Washington Post does not want to talk about that at all.
We got a lot of hassling when we started talking about Cynthia McKinney's ties to the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, absolutely. So then he goes on, he says, criminal investigators have found no evidence that the IT workers had any connection to a foreign government. No evidence of that. Investigators looking for clues about espionage. Instead, what they found was that the workers were using one congressional server as if it were their own computer, storing personal information such as children's homework and family photos on it.
You know what else I found very interesting, Mr. Hudson? You know, even if for whatever reason, you know, Shawn Boburg, he interviewed Laurel Everly weeks before I did, and quite extensively, according to her. Even if for whatever reason he found her not to be credible, how could he have not gotten to the shed that was locked and the Cox cable router in the basement? I mean, those are just facts that those items were there. And I mean, the fact that Imran rented this house to her, that this was one of the houses that he had purchased with the fraudulent bank loans, that he had the key to the house and was there every 2 to 3 days, even though he didn't live there. It just seems very strange. I mean, what? So this guy's working full-time in Congress, but he has time to go to the house every 2 or 3 days to make repairs? I mean, if he's such a successful real estate mogul, wouldn't he hire someone to do those repairs because he's got to be busy in Congress doing his full-time job? I mean, how are these guys not making these connections?
Because he doesn't want to.
There's another thing I want to point out to you. I'm looking at the photograph on the Washington Post online for this September 16th article by Shawn Boburg, Federal Probe into House Technology Worker Imran Awan Yields Intrigue, no evidence of espionage. I mean, in addition to being totally wrong, I was intrigued by the photograph of Imran himself. Because if you look at it, this is a photograph that's taken using a technique called shallow depth of field. And what that means is, you know, Imran's face and eyes are in sharp focus, but things far away from him are not. So there's a very narrow column of area in front of the camera lens where things are in focus. And people on Facebook have been suggesting that maybe they photoshopped it, but they didn't, because you can tell. This is a very subtle, natural effect of a large aperture on a professional lens on a camera with a full-frame imaging plane. And you can see that even the distance between the tip of his nose, his eyes, and his ear, there's variations in focus. The front lapel of his jacket, the rear lapel of his jacket, the buildings in the distance, they're very soft focus. So that indicates to me that this would have been taken with a very large lens opening. And I was there that day. He's wearing the same shirt, tie, and suit that he was wearing in court, so let's presume this was taken that day. Of course, he could have just put that same suit on the next day or another day. But whatever it is, when he left court, him and his lawyers went charging out of the building. They did not want to stop and talk to people. Yet here he's in a very calm pose, taken with a lens that on that day would have required a lot of ND filtration to get to this level of opening. I mean, I suppose they could have used a super duper fast shutter speed. But regardless, he's posed here, and this is a carefully composed photograph that seems like a PR photograph where Imran met a photographer who was, you know, knowingly taking this picture for the Washington Post. I mean, this is like Imran's modeling headshot. It doesn't seem like a photograph that somebody just snapped with their camera as he was running out of the court building, like the photographs we've seen from Gateway Pundit and others who were stationed outside the building when he came out. That was a very frantic pose where he's walking with the lawyer, and you know, he's standing here looking off into the distance like a Calvin Klein ad. Right.
And bear in mind, too, when you start taking a look at the photographs that seem to pop up over and over again, they all seem to be kind of the same photograph. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes, he's not a very, you know, he's made obviously a concerted effort to keep photographs of himself off the internet. So this seems like a very planned photograph that the Washington Post must have been in communication with his legal team, which incidentally, they have a quote in here from his lawyer, Christopher Gowan, who called the espionage claims ludicrous. Frankly, I think his claims that Imran was driving for Uber are ludicrous. The espionage claims are backed up by what Thomas Paine categorized as grand slam evidence.
Well, one of the stories here, to be honest about it, is that Mr. Gowan, when he presented that information to the court about him being an Uber driver, which, based on our investigation, said no.
Yeah.
Uber said that. They said, no, we've never heard of Alex Awan, Imran Awan. We have nobody of that name working for us. Is that not true?
Well, I understand Luke Rosiak called Uber. We might want to verify that, but that's our understanding.
I think we had that from another source as well.
Okay.
But the thing of it is that was a blatant lie.
I agree.
I guess that when you consider that Hillary Clinton can lie to Congress and get away with it, and Mr. Comey can lie to Congress and get away with it, I guess that this is just a standard way of doing things now. We can also lie to judges. Is that the way our justice system works?
I think Mr. Gowan thinks that.
The thing of it is that it seems to me that the Clinton Foundation has committed at least 8 or more felonies
this week.
So, to me, I'll tell you what I think. I think 1,000 people ought to go out and start a foundation and follow the Clinton and Obama models. And if they get jammed up, they need to use the Clinton-Obama defense strategy of they're above the law, we should be too. We have a broken justice system now.
Yeah.
It is absolutely broken. Now, I'm sure that the Washington Post is probably going to say, oh, our justice system isn't broke. It works just fine. And if they would tell the truth, they would say, well, there's a justice system for the elite, and there's a justice system for the piece of shit Americans. Bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it certainly appears to me.
Yeah.
The deplorables, I consider myself a deplorable, a proud one at that.
Mm-hmm.
The deplorables of this country, we have a justice system that is given to us by the elites, by the corrupt criminals like Hillary Clinton, and spies like Imran Awan,
mm-hmm.
and criminals like Debbie Wasserman Schultz. We, the deplorables, get one type of justice system.
Right.
And all the others get a different justice system. If you're a congressman or a U.S. senator, if you're the Clintons or the Obamas, if you're a CEO or if you're a billionaire who's guilty who's guilty of having sex with a minor child, you get to go before a whole different set of judges, and your attorneys get to be people like Mr. Gowan.
Yeah.
Who says, well, there's no espionage here. Why, the espionage claim is just absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah.
And then the Washington Post, what do? They don't put out the information.
It's quite interesting.
They don't put out the evidence.
They suppress it.
They suppress it, correct.
I wonder if they would have said anything at all if we hadn't interviewed Laurel Everly.
I don't think they would. I think that this article is a direct result of the investigation that Mr. Webb has been conducting for almost a year, the investigation that you and Crowdsource has been conducting, and the Crowdsource itself, which has been participating. And I believe that when you went and walked the halls of Congress delivering the intelligence packet,
right,
clear and present danger, and I believe that activity is what has spawned this response. Mm-hmm. It's the same old thing. There's nothing behind the curtain. There's absolutely nothing behind the curtain. This is a story, nothing more. These are just stories told by right wing, far right, tobacco chewing idiots that are just simply wanting to spew yet another conspiracy theory. That's what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think our next move should be?
I don't think I want to discuss that here.
Got it.
On the phone, but we are definitely coming up with a plan because we've had that plan. Although the Crowdsource audience doesn't quite understand it, and yes, we are going to name names. We're going to name a name tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to name a name tomorrow because he's part of this and has been part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm real tempted to say who it is, but I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And no, this isn't conjecture, and no, it's not a conspiracy theory. We actually have proof. And I wonder if the Washington Post will pick up on that, say anything about it. Probably not.
I wonder the same.
In this article, he goes on to say, well, you know, it was a very lax environment. As a matter of fact, that's Jim Bacon, a lawyer representing Abid. All was a very lax environment. It's not these poor boys' fault. Why, it's the fault of somebody else. All they did was do what they were told to do by somebody.
Right.
Well, who is that somebody? Was that Congresswoman Schultz? Oh no, she's going to say, I didn't tell them what to do. Well, who was it? Which congressperson told them to do these things? You know, I'll bet you nobody ever said. Nobody's ever going to say who gave them their orders.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to say, Mr. Bacon, being the great defense attorney that he is, he says, I can tell you what they were doing. What they were doing was not unusual. Well, hell, they've been there for what?
13
years.
Yeah.
13 years. So I would venture to say that by then, after 13 years of spying,
it becomes the norm.
That it probably wasn't unusual anymore.
Right.
And nowhere does it mention or go into the fact that these individuals were paid huge sums of money, 3-4 times more than what a person was supposed to be paid in these positions, and then it's alluded to, although he doesn't come right out and say it, but they were naughty boys, because it appears that they were on the payroll, but they weren't the ones doing the work.
Right.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good deal. Imran Awan gets his wife Hina and a couple brothers and a friend, and they all make $150,000-$60,000 a year. But the truth is Imran was the one doing the work. They were probably giving, sounds like a plan there. I'm going to get you a $160,000 a year job.
Yeah.
And we're going to split it 50-50. I don't know that happened, but it sure sounds like it.
Right.
So then, of course, he goes on to say that Imran Awan was arrested at the airport. Obviously, he's not trying to flee to Pakistan.
Right.
And he goes on and says the investigation is ongoing by both the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Which that's funny in of itself, because one of the people at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., is that not Debbie Wasserman Schultz's brother?
Well, Stephen Wasserman is a U.S. attorney.
Interesting. Very interesting. The article is obviously a method of propping up, lending credibility, and trying to diffuse the seriousness of what has been going on in Congress with the Awan brothers.
Right.
And in my opinion, I believe it's going to prove out that the Awan brothers are an ISI spy ring, and that they definitely have Pakistani government ties.
Right.
That Debbie Wasserman Schultz was fully aware, Hillary Clinton was aware, and the information that they were taking from these congressional offices was most likely used in a pay-to-play scheme, utilized to subvert an election, and possibly to blackmail members of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
If Mr. Fairy Tale Teller, Mr. Boburg, wants to talk about, wants to spew this kind of stuff out, then we may as well give him a really good conspiracy theory. But the funny thing about it is that it's actually based on continued evidence that we continue to dig up.
Right.
Gee, I don't know that I've ever heard of a conspiracy theory that's actually based on real evidence. Oops, no. Seems to me that there's a lot of things being called conspiracy theories, and there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence to give those so-called theories credence.
You know, the other theory that's really bothering me is Luke Rosiak's theory about Imran having access to this 123@mail.house.gov. Luke, in his August 29th article, characterized that as a working email address, but he doesn't tell us how he determined that. What does he consider working? He also said that Imran.Awan@mail.house.gov was no longer working. And how does he characterize that? I kind of want to talk to Luke Rosiak about these things because, you know, irrespective of his personal feelings about me or how I do my work, I think these are important questions for him to answer.
I'm not too impressed with Luke Rosiak's work. I am and I'm not. I think that when he gets on a trail, you know, like a hound dog, I think he's pretty good at sniffing it out. But on some of the things that he's reported on in regards to the Awan brothers spy ring in Congress, I'm sorry to say, I think the old hound has gotten off the trail with a bitch and heat. So that's just how I feel about it. Hopefully he'll get back on track, but he hasn't really picked up on some things, in my opinion, that he should have.
Well, I'm sure you recall I mentioned that Andre Taggart told me that Luke Rosiak had contacted him suggesting that the interview that I did with Andre Taggart was somehow insufficient, and that if Mr. Taggart wanted to speak to someone in the quote-unquote real media, Luke would put him in touch with somebody at the Washington Post. So, I mean... Yeah,
Mr. Podesta, right? Or Mr.
Maybe, I don't know.
Boburg. But I will tell you somebody that I've been watching and that I really appreciate the information that they're coming out with, because it's nothing but excellent. And they have superb sources, and that's True Pundit. I can't speak highly enough of them.
Yeah. Yeah, Thomas has been a huge help and a huge supporter for us, so I really appreciate it.
I have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for Thomas Paine and the True Pundit. Yeah. So that's all I have for tonight. It's been a long week. We have a long ways to go. Like I said, we'll be naming a name tomorrow, and we definitely have some evidence to go with it.
Well, all right, I'll be ready for that. All right, Mr. Hudson, thanks for this information. I'll get this ready as soon as I can and post it up, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.
All right, buddy. You're doing a great job. Just keep at it.
Thank you.
Yep. God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Take care.